Britt Alexander and her paper on the European Marine Board.
Okay, thanks very much. Hello, everyone. And thanks to the organizers for inviting me to speak today. So I am a science officer at the European Marine Board, and I'm going to be talking today about the contributions of our organization to the Ocean Decade. So next slide. So the European Marine Board is a science policy think tank in Europe, and it provides a platform to advance marine research and also to bridge the gap between science and policy. So we're a members organization, and we're made up of 35 members from 18 European countries, representing approximately 10,000 scientists. And our member organizations are either research performing institutes, research funding organizations, or university networks or consortia. Next slide. So we have various different activities that we carry out to transfer knowledge between science and policy. So one of these is our publications. We also organize a lot of science policy events and forums to discuss selected issues, webinars. We participate in EU projects and tenders, and also in the last couple of years, we have young ambassadors that help to reach a wider audience with our messages. Next slide. So we already had at the beginning of the session a really nice introduction to the Ocean Decade by Francisco. Basically we held in 2017, the 6th EMB Forum was on the topic of implementing the UN 2030 agenda and the role that marine science will play in this. And during this forum, Vladimir Ryabinin, who's the Executive Secretary of the IOC, he announced that the Ocean Decade was established by the UN, which had been decided conveniently the day before. So it was a good topic of conversation during our forum. And the mission of the Ocean Decade, in case you're not aware, is to enable transformative ocean science to provide solutions for sustainable development and also to better connect people into the ocean. Next slides. So this is basically to show that there's various mechanisms in place that were outlined in the implementation plan for the Ocean Decade, various objectives and challenges that have been identified, and all of these aim to support the decade outcomes. So for the clean ocean, healthy and resilient, productive ocean, a predicted ocean, a safe ocean, an accessible ocean, and finally, an inspiring and engaging ocean. Next slide. So in 2019, the European Marine Board published our flagship publication, which comes out once approximately every 5 years. And this document was an important scientific contribution to the Ocean Decade, and its authorship was made up from our member organization, so to scientists from Europe, and it gives a bird's eye view of marine science. It looks to the future, so to 2030 within the time period of the Ocean Decade and beyond, and it identifies key topics and themes that are set to significantly advance our understanding of the marine and broader Earth and climate systems, which will be of increasing importance to societal well-being in decades to come. So there were 5 key scientific themes and chapters that were within this document. So the first was the 4D and connected ocean. So this is basically looking at the ocean in its 3 dimensions, plus the dimension of time, which was touched on by Martin Visbeck, who was actually one of the, earlier in the session, he's one of the authors of this document as well. And there's a chapter on multi-stressed and rapidly changing ocean and the science of surprises. So that's all about better predicting extreme events and natural hazards, originating in the ocean and also the impacts of climate change. There's a chapter in novel technologies, data and modeling, and also co-design transdisciplinary sustainability science, which is based on finding solutions to societal challenges. So next slide. And later in 2019, we brought out a policy brief, which is also an official Ocean Decade document. So we basically looked at the chapters that we had in Navigating the Future 5 and the recommendations that came out of these chapters, and we mapped them onto the societal outcomes of the Ocean Decade. At the time, there were only 6 because the Inspiring and Engaging Ocean one was added later on. So what you can see is that there's a huge amount of overlap between the recommendations and these topics and the societal outcomes. So it just really highlights the multidisciplinarity of the science that we need during the next decade to address these outcomes. Next slide. So here I will just go over a couple of the key recommendations that were in this policy brief to address each of the societal outcomes of the Ocean Decade. So to achieve a clean ocean, we recommended that we need to improve the science to evaluate the cumulative effects of pollutants in the ocean, including plastics. And to achieve a safe ocean, one of the recommendations was that more research is needed on meteo-tsunamis, marine geohazards, and this includes the influence of climate change on these geohazards and also the impact of the hazards on marine biodiversity. Next slide. And to achieve a healthy and resilient ocean, one of the recommendations was to set up a new interdisciplinary program on ocean connectivity, focusing on the 4D structure and function of the ocean. So the main concept is to have a more holistic approach to ocean science. For the transparent ocean, we recommended to develop a virtual reality ocean platform where data is available and processed in real time. And we also talked quite a bit about this concept of digital ocean twins that Martin Disbeck also mentioned in his talk. Next slide. For a sustainably harvested ocean, we recommended to integrate assessment of resilience strategies, trade-offs, and ethical concepts into decision support frameworks. And finally, for a predicted ocean, we need to feed data into interdisciplinary models for early warning systems, for events related to multiple stressors, predicting tipping points and extreme events. Next slide. So this is an overview of the recent publications from the European Marine Board over the last 2 years. So we cover a wide range of topics from, here we have ocean observations, oceans and human health, big data marine science, and research vessels. And you can see that all of our activities map onto and support at least one of the societal outcomes of the Ocean Decade. So during the Ocean Decade, we're planning to highlight these links more clearly through our communication activities. Next slide. And we have currently 5 active working groups. So we're working at the moment on a new document on marine geohazards, underwater noise, coastal resilience, marine renewable energy, and marine science communication. So each of these is a working group made up of around 10 to 15 European scientists, and they're tasked with developing recommendations for knowledge gaps in marine science, and specifically the science we need to address societal challenges. So these are also, you can see, closely linked to the decade societal outcomes. Next slide. And finally, we have an event coming up, which is an official Ocean Decade event, which is the 8th EMB Forum on the topic of supporting the Ocean Decade in Europe. So this will be on the 1st of December in Brussels. It will be held as a hybrid event. And basically the aim is to bring together diverse stakeholders from science, industry, policy, governance, NGOs, and the public to discuss how we can best deliver the ocean decades, specifically in Europe. So we'll be looking at what's already happening in Europe and what needs to happen in the future. And we'll be looking in more detail at some of our recent publications on geohazards and underwater noise. And we'll also have a session specifically dedicated to early career researchers, where we'll hear from a couple of our young ambassadors on what they're doing to support the ocean decade. Next slide. So that's it, thank you. And you can find all of our publications along with all of our other activities on our website, and I will put a link in the chat as well. We have a dedicated page which describes all of our activities towards the ocean decade. So we're just starting out with communicating this on our website, but there'll be more information on there as we continue to develop our contributions to the ocean decade in the coming years. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Britt. That was really, really interesting. And we do have one question for you, and probably just time for this because we're almost at the time the next part's starting. The Marine Board's mission is to bridge the gap between science and policy. What's the most effective, important change you'd like to see in the science community to improve the relationship between science and policy? And conversely, the most important change you'd like to see in the policy community? It's a big question.
Yeah, but I think the most straightforward answer to that, in my opinion, is more transdisciplinary science that's co-designed. So this is basically where you are not developing science that's focused on single disciplines, but really bringing in all the relevant academic disciplines, but also maybe the social science, well, definitely the social sciences, which is really important to look at these sort of science policy interfaces and analyze what works well and what doesn't. And that's really interesting that there was a paper shared earlier about how to do co-design. So that's exactly the kind of social science that's really, really helpful. And it's the same from the policy side, is that they need to engage more with the scientific community in this transdisciplinary co-designed processes. So I think it's not that I think all science needs to be transdisciplinary, because there's always a place and time for this more fundamental and traditional way and traditional approach to science. But I think that this co-designed transdisciplinary science needs to become more mainstreamed, and that's really a very effective avenue for this knowledge transfer between both sides.
Thank you, Britt. That was